Said this. And so now bear in mind that as we're going through here, the outline, it's kind of interesting how when I put it on paper versus a PowerPoint, sometimes I change the way I want to present something. I do have a day job. I am not the world's most accomplished writer. I try to, but I try to organize this the best I can. If I were a professional, okay, a professional writer or a professional theologian, I probably would put more effort and get it a lot, get it a lot better. But I am not. I'm a financial analyst, and wow, it's my brain is already worn out before I even get to this. But I do try to. I do think it's important that we have an outline for this class. If we were teaching Philippians or Ephesians, those books obviously deserve an outline as well. But you can walk away from those classes and be a better person by applying the scriptures to your life, right? And the purpose of that class is not just to fill your head with information, but to make you a better person. In this class, yes, we want to make you a better person, but obviously the material is a little bit academic. Okay, it just is. It's just the nature of the class, and so I think that I've had people come up to me and said, "Appreciate everything you said. I can't remember any of it. Please write it down." And I'll be like, "Yes, thank you. I need to do that." So for the few people that I know that not everyone will read this, but you do kind of have it. Put it in your Bible. When you do use it in your personal study, I think it's a good starting point, right? And then I do recommend, if you ever do a real deep dive, I do recommend Kaufman's commentary. There's other commentaries as well. The ones that you will see me quote in this study, and I did this because I'm trying to get a spectrum of views within our brotherhood that is rational, sound, doctrinally correct, but they don't agree. They do not agree on some of this stuff, okay? And the people that I've been using are Shelley. This is something he wrote in the 1980s. I know that he's not known for his commentary on Revelation. I understand that, but he did write a really good commentary on Revelation many years ago, and it's out there, and a lot of people have read it, and so I thought it was a good one to use. And then there's Homer Haley. And his commentary, Foy Wallace, and the J.W. Roberts, which is a very old one. I think he was at Lipscomb in the 30s, but that is one of the more influential commentaries in the Brotherhood. And then Kaufman as well. And I feel I'm leaving someone out, I think, but I'll come across that in a minute. But I try to refer to them. Okay, I will say that in my personal study, and you'll see this in the study too, I tend to agree a little bit more with Kaufman than other people. Okay, just because of this, I find the way that Kaufman outlined Revelation, I found it to be eye-opening, and by doing so, and by looking at it this way, it's a whole lot easier to explain. Now, we don't want to lay it out just because we want to explain it this way, but once I saw it, it's like I can't unsee it. It just makes sense. It seems like John is repeating the visions over and over again, and that's what we'll talk about this morning. And when you see that he's actually saying the same thing 7 times, well, actually he's saying the same thing 6 times, and then he has a 7th vision at the end that's about heaven. The symbols, they explain each other, and they become easier to explain overall. So we're not looking for some unusual, weird event, and we're not looking for whatever the biblical equivalent of a conspiracy theory is deep in scriptures that only the most academic among us can really understand. I don't think that's what John intended when he wrote his book. And I think the keys to understanding Revelation are to be found in other parts of the Bible and in other parts of Revelation itself. And it makes sense that, John likes the number 7, and like all Hebrew writers, he likes repeating stuff. There is a sense of parallelism, and they do that a lot. And God himself repeats himself in our own history. There's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of historical studies historical events in the Bible that serve as analogies or allegories for the arc of history. You know, I can say I believe that Adam was real. He was a real person. I believe he was a real person. But their experience with the tree and the knowledge of good and evil is that is a real event. But it serves as an allegory for all of our experiences with right and wrong, and the way we disobey God and the way we rebel. And I believe that Jonah was a real person. I believe that he was swallowed by a real fish. But that whole story also serves as an allegory for the dispensation of Christianity among the Gentiles. And Jesus refers to it as such. He calls it the sign of Jonah. Okay? And Jonah being in the fish for 3 days and 3 nights is not an accident. Okay? And so we're gonna see some of that as we go through Revelation. I just want to put that seed out there. I'm gonna pay that off in the next few weeks. I'm not going to do it right now. Yesterday, I mean, just kind of give you an example of the way things work. When you put something out here that needs to be understood, it's out there. It's something that everyone has 100 different opinions about. And you kind of have to sift through it to find out what happened. And sometimes you're not going to find out what happened. All right, we can look at what happened yesterday, okay? And no one really knows what happened. I mean, we know that someone got shot, okay? We know that, and we think we know who did it, you know, but we don't know why. We don't know who, you know. It's just kind of out there right now, and everyone has their theories. And there's going to be a big fight in the media over the next few weeks about what the truth is, and how is the news useful if the average person cannot make sense of it. And what's really scary is after those events of yesterday, people put stuff out there, including videos that are not real. I mean, some of the I've seen there have been a couple of videos, you know, where they had one video of it was purportedly the gunman, and they used artificial intelligence to create it and put it out there, and it's just like, you know, how are we supposed to figure out the truth? You know, in so doing, and it's kind of like, I mean, there's some parallels in the way people approach Book of Revelation and in modern political events. People can kind of read into things that aren't there, or they think something's there, but it's really hard to really have a concrete discussion. And once you try to talk about it or convince someone of it, the conversation just goes in a million different directions. And that's the way Revelation is. And so I'm, you know, as we approach this morning, you know, we may have all different opinions, and I would love to hear if anyone has questions. Please stop me, and let's talk about some of the questions. I'm just laying it out the best way I can, and I think that I think it's a good starting point. Again, this is called a survey of Revelation. It is not meant to be an exhaustive study, but more of an introduction to the book that we just simply neglect. So we got to the end of chapter 7, and I do contend that the sixth seal and the seventh does relate to the final judgment. But all the events that preceded that were not tied to specific historical events, but really the condition of mankind, okay? That the four horsemen are with us today. They are not a particular war. They are not a particular people. They are not a particular politician or any kind of event. It is the condition of man. There is war, there is famine, there's pestilence, and there's death. Those are not the four horses, but they are but those four plagues came with the four horses. But if you read scriptures, that's not how they break out, right? The red horse is most notably war, but then the other three plagues are actually associated with the last horse. We read through that, and then we read about the souls of the saints, and they were being persecuted. They wanted to know when the end times would come, and then there was the final the events of the final judgment. And any calamity in history, any judgment of any society, you can read into that and make it fit into this narrative. And so there is that final judgment at the end of time, but before then, yes, societies will be judged. And societies will collapse and societies will fall apart, and there will be judgment before Judgment Day, in some sense. That's allowed, but but that's not. When we look at Revelation, we see that he's talking about the condition of man, and he's not getting as specific as we think he is. So they shall hunger no more, neither thirst no more. The sun shall not strike them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb in the midst of the throne will be their shepherd, and he will guide them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. And that is the end of the sixth seal. And then in Revelation 8:1, when the Lamb opened the seventh seal, there was silence for half an hour. Now, we take it, is that half an hour in the vision, or half an hour? Actually, half an hour is John is sitting there in Patmos, looking at heaven. I take it that it's both. That he does sit there and he looks in heaven for half an hour and sees silence. Now, in Revelation 8:1, or looking at the final judgment, we see that there's a description of negatives. We don't know. We're not told what's in heaven. We're told what's not in heaven. Okay, very interesting. There's no hunger. There's no pain. God will wipe away the tears. Seems to be resolution. All this struggle in human life, it's taken away, which is hard for us to relate to, right? We like the struggle. We don't pick up a book and just read a book and have it describe, oh, this is pretty and that's pretty and this is nice, unless you're reading a tour book, and you're planning a European vacation, you don't know. It's not what you're interested in. You want a story. You want a struggle. You go to work and you don't want it, you like to maybe have a conversation at the water cooler. When you go to work, you've got things to do and resolve. And so when we think about heaven, is everything being resolved? There is no struggle. It's hard for us to relate to. It's like almost like explaining marriage to a child. We tell a child that marriage is wonderful. How is a child supposed to relate to that? And in a way, we have to think that way too. That we don't know when we're transformed to be with God. Somehow His presence will be satisfying. It'll be like a moment suspended in time, and we're afraid. Well, are we going to get bored? We're just going to sit there. No, it has to be more than that. It has to be just being in the presence of God. It has to be satisfactory, and we do not know what joys await us. The glories of the redeemed are too wonderful to be described in human language. The best John could do, as the Spirit of God led him to write of heaven, was to use a series of negatives. No hunger, no thirst, no scorching heat. And how is such a perfect bliss possible? The Lamb is the supplier. He is the shepherd. He takes his flock to the fountains of the water of life. He brings them so near to the throne itself that God can reach out to wipe away every tear. Such a beautiful version of heaven. Now, who's this guy? This guy is Stephen Langston. Now, why am I bringing him up? Now, he is more famous, actually, for being the archbishop that helped resolve the little event called the Magna Carta. That's what he's really known for. But he also did something else that was kind of interesting. He's the one that gave you your chapters in your book. Okay? Now, that was actually done several times by several different people in several different languages, but over time, we ended up going with his. And some of his chapter breaks, they don't make any sense at all. It's like some chapters have like 5 verses, and then others 85. And then sometimes there seems to be a method in his madness on how he breaks out the different chapters, and usually it's of no consequence, right? We don't really worry about where the chapters start and stop. On this one, it kind of matters. Silence in heaven. If I were to number the chapters in Revelation, okay, I would not have ended the chapter in verse 13. I would have taken the top verse in 8:1 and I would have added it to the sixth seal, okay? Because it's the seventh seal. That's the end of the vision. That's where the chapter should end. Why is this important? Well, because people will open their Bible, open to chapter 8, and they will look at the seventh seal and think that it is introducing the trumpets and that they are connected. Okay? But if you really look at the verse, that silence in heaven, okay, that's the end of the first vision. Okay? And this problem is the pivot upon which the whole interpretation turns, making the problem of its interpretation probably the most important in the whole book. Once the wrong view of 8:1 is established in the interpreter's understanding, it is impossible for the exegesis of subsequent chapters to be correct. So if you don't think that there are parallel visions, and you think that somehow he is leading from the end of the seventh seal and he's going into the seven trumpets, you think, okay, we're talking about sequential events here. And then that begs explanation. And that begs us to, now we're looking for answers. And because we've got all this stuff, and this has got to mean that, and this can't be the last judgment because we got five more visions, we got 5 more series of events to go through. That's the problem with this, and that's what happens. People pick that up and they think that the seven behind the seventh seal are the 7 trumpets, but that's really not what happens. If you look at the verse, verse 2, John sees the silence, and then he says, "And then I saw." He sees something else. The cycle starts over. Okay. Just to give you an idea, the seals, trumpets, and bowls are not related to one another. See, I'm giving you different views here. Okay, I don't agree with this, but it's not a point of salvation or anything. I'm not going to. I think that people are going to disagree, and that's on this. And I don't think it's going to affect doctrine too much, but there are disagreements here. The seals, trumpets, and bowls are not unrelated to one another. Neither do they retell the same story 3 times. The 7th seal reveals 7 angels who have 7 trumpets to sound. Okay, that's what Shelley thinks. Wallace, the trumpets follow the vision of the day of wrath in the 6th seal and was a further vision of judgments. The trumpets of the 7th seal were the signal to proceed to the accomplishment of that which the seals signified. Now that's what they agree with. I don't agree with that. Haley, the 7th seal does not extend to include the 7 trumpets. He disagrees. He says the seals are complete, and the altar scene serves as a prelude to the trumpets. Now these guys that I'm reading, they all knew each other and would have been on the same lecture circuit. Okay, so we're not. They disagree, but they're still brothers in Christ, right? Kaufman, such views are incorrect. He's referring back to the views like that of Wallace and Shelley. That half hour of silence is a terminus reaching to eternity, summing up the whole period between the 2 advents of Christ. Okay? And then there's verse 2, and then I saw the 7 angels who stand before God. Now we've got a new vision. Okay? And another angel came and stood at the altar with a golden censer, and he was given much incense to offer with the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar before the throne, and the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints rose before God from the hand of the angel. Then the angel took the censer and filled it with fire from the altar and threw it on the earth. And there were peals of thunder, rumbling flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. Okay? And again, what's he going to do? If you go back to the outline, this is the condition of man, mankind picks sides, final judgment. And that's the cycle of each vision. Again, I'm going to say it again. Condition of man, mankind picks sides, then there's a final judgment. So right now we're going into another scene here where we're looking at the condition of man. I'm going to go ahead and skip that. Now the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared to blow them. The first angel blew his trumpet, and there were followed hail, fire, mixed with blood, and these were thrown upon the earth, and 1/3 of the earth was burned up, and 1/3 of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was burned up. And then I meant to take off that verse. There we go. Let's see. I duplicated a slide here. Bear with me. Okay, so let's talk about the trumpets. Any explanation of the trumpets, according to Haley, is generally unsatisfactory when one applies them to certain places and definite periods in history and allegorizes them to extreme difficulty, okay? And then Hendrickson agrees with that. They do not symbolize single or separate events, but they refer to woes that may be seen any day of the year in any part of the globe. Hence the trumpets are synchronous with the seals, okay? And so I just read the first trumpet, and I apologize for shuffling my slides incorrectly. This first trumpet, it may be a possible reference to the Egyptian plagues, but I don't really think it's specific to that. He's talking about paying back evil with his own blood. The land is cursed just like God said it would be cursed back in Genesis. There's earthquakes, there's famine, there's drought, and there's bad weather. Yes, you have a question?
Actually, I was just going to make an additional comment in favor of the potential shifting of the seventh seal to chapter 7. There are two markers that are in favor of that, and one is that the seventh seal is the only one that is not accompanied by some sort of sound. One of the living creatures saying, "Come," or the shout of the multitude. And that's all around. And the second thing is that's all around the throne. Mm-hmm. When the trumpets start, it shifts to a different piece of the heavenly temple's layout, the altar, which is in favor of, when the camera moves from the throne to the altar, and it's a different set of things. Right. That's a good indication that there's a separation.
That's a good point. I appreciate that. No, I really can't add to that, and that's a very good observation. Okay, so the second angel blew his trumpet, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood, and a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. So again, this is not talking about Santorini or Tambora or Krakatoa or one of the great volcanoes that we mentioned. I mentioned Krakatoa the other day, just as an event where it did explode. And it was either Krakatoa or it was a volcano in El Salvador, or it may have been a volcano in Iceland. They don't quite know, but they do know there were volcanic eruptions in the 6th century, and it darkened the earth 4 years and triggered our first wave of Black Death, and a third of Europe died, and a lot of Asia died. The end did not come, okay? But what it's talking about here is we are in struggle with our environment. Okay, the world is cursed. This is very difficult. So he's just explaining that and building on that theme that this is humanity. We're suffering. So the mountains also can be equated with power, human power. It's not often. It's quite often actually that in Old Testament verses that sometimes different kings are associated with mountains, and we will actually see some of that later in the book. But it could be that in the sense that the different kingdoms will be thrown into the sea of people. The sea is again it's also a reference to humanity. Now, how John is actually using that here, I can't really answer the question per se. But we do know that the sea is cursed as well as the land. The third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many people died from the water because it has been made bitter. So now the salt water was cursed in the second trumpet. Now in the third trumpet, the fresh water is cursed. Now there's no reason, and John gives us no reason to think that wormwood is the Antichrist. He doesn't say that, nor is it a specific person like Attila the Hun or Muhammad or anyone like that. Wormwood is used all throughout the Old Testament. Jeremiah mentions wormwood as punishment for God's idolatry. Amos 5:7 and 6:12 says justice and righteousness have become like wormwood, like bitterness. It was a medicinal plant. It's been associated with absinthe, and it it has medicinal properties, but it also has been abused. It turns man's judgment, it clouds man's judgment. And so when you're talking about justice and righteousness being perverted, that is the effect of wormwood. And that is what it is, that's what it is most likely referring to. He's just using an Old Testament word and attaching it to a symbol that they would equate with having clouded judgment, everything just being undone. And I'll just give you some examples. Beware lest there be among you a man or a woman or clan or tribe whose heart is turning away today from the Lord our God to go and serve the gods of those nations. Beware lest there be among you a root bearing poisonous and bitter fruit. And 5:7, O you who turn justice to wormwood and cast down righteousness to the earth. I mean, that is you can see John is referring to Amos 5. And those that were familiar with Amos 5 would see that John is just referring back to the Old Testament prophet. And that's about it, okay? Do horses run on rocks? Does one plow there with oxen? Have you turned justice into poison and the fruit of righteousness into wormwood? You also, if anybody here is a C.S. Lewis fan, who's wormwood in C.S. Lewis? So in C.S. Lewis literature, Screwtape Letters. Screwtape. I don't know where he got the name Screwtape, but he writes to his nephew, and his nephew is Wormwood. That's the name that C.S. Lewis chose for that devil. The fourth angel blew his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of their light must be darkened, and a third of the sky, a third of the day might be kept from shining, and likewise a third of the night. So he's getting progressively worse. At first, the land is cursed, and there's hail. And then the sea has become tormented, and that's really violent, and that's even scarier than a hailstorm. And then the third seal is there's a meteorite. And now the fourth sign is a third of the sky has been wiped away. Now, obviously, if we get up one morning and a fourth of the sky, a third of the sky is gone, like literally gone, yeah, okay, you might say it's the second coming is happening. And I bet you that Jesus will be there in about 5 minutes right after that, or simultaneous. So you wake up one morning, we won't even have time to argue about it, because it'll be, it'll be, it will be the second coming. But I don't think, what John is doing here is building on, there's, things are bad, things are worse, things are getting even worse, and now things are just terrible, and everything has come undone. And that is, your world is collapsing. We have been very fortunate in this country to have such a long period of peace. We really haven't had an existential threat that manifested itself since World War II. There was an existential threat with the Soviet Union. And even now, I mean, I think, there's to some extent we do have some existential threats, but we live in this umbrella of peace that could collapse at any moment. But we don't worry ourselves about it because we can't do anything about it, and we haven't seen anything happen yet, so we keep going. And that's how we live our lives. And then we live our lives in peace, and we just go about our business. But there are many people throughout human history, and their entire world becomes undone. I mean, if you imagine being Hezekiah and waking up one morning and looking out and seeing the entire Syrian army outside your walls, your world would be undone at that point. And we don't relate to that, but things like that can happen. I mean, and any time things like that did happen in the Bible, it was a totally foreign, totally new event to the people that were on the receiving end of such a bad event. You're Chicken Little until the sky actually does fall. You're Chicken Little, and it's just one of those things. Now, it can't happen, but that is, I think what John is doing there is just things are just incredibly bad, and that is in life. It's just very dangerous. So first hail. So I explained that, and then I did say that Joel, Amos, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel all use the falling sky in their literature. The kings are often used mountains are often used to symbolize kings. That's a misprint there. The most famous being Lucifer, the light bearer in the Babylon in Isaiah 14:12. Now it's interesting, when you hear the name Lucifer, we associate that with Satan. If you read Isaiah, he's not talking about Satan. He's talking about the actual king of Babylon. There is a chapter in Ezekiel, I think it's 25, where he's talking about Satan, but we don't usually think about that verse, about that chapter. But that word Lucifer, it means loose is light, fur is bearer, light bearer, like Christopher is Christ bearer. That's one of those things where, I mean, just like Revelation, we've got to go back and read our scriptures and ask ourselves, is that really what Isaiah was saying? So the trumpets parallel the other symbols, like the first four horsemen. They depict the cursed earth, and then they're in the same order as the bowls of wrath that we'll talk about in a couple of weeks: earth, sea, fresh water, and sky. It's just an example of him discussing the totality of the condition of man. And the visions are parallel, but each emphasize different aspects. Okay. Again, there's an emphasis on 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. This would obviously is terrible, but it also signifies restraint. So he gets to the fifth trumpet, and then I looked and I heard an eagle crying with a loud voice that flew directly overhead, "Woe, woe, woe to those who dwell on the earth, at the blast of the other trumpets that the three angels are about to blow." So there's a good use of the number 7. There's also a good use of the number 4, and a good use of the number 3. 4 plus 3 makes 7. So we had the first 4 trumpets, and we had the four parts of the earth. Now we're going to have the next 2 trumpets talk about mankind picking sides, and then the 7th trumpet will show the final judgment. The eagle, this word that's used, if you read in the King James, it's usually referred to as an angel, the great angel. But the word is atos, and that is eagle. So there is the original King James, later translations disagree with that word. We also see that word in Matthew 24:28, in Luke 17:37, when Christ says, "Where the body is there also the vultures that will be gathered." Now that verse is translated as vulture in 17:37. And you got to realize that eagles are unclean birds and are very akin to vultures. We think of eagles as being great and majestic, and we think of vultures as being ugly, nasty birds. But they're very closely related, and when they're in the sky, they're both they have very broad wingspans, and eagles do eat dead meat just like vultures do. So that was a symbol of Rome, but there is no reason to think that that's what's going on here. He's not necessarily associating that with Rome. These are the eagles that you would see in that part of the world. Okay, sometimes people think of a bald eagle. Well, they don't have bald eagles in Israel. The eagle that they would have seen would be much more like the one on the left, and then there's also the sea eagle. And griffin vulture is what it's called. So then I looked and I heard an eagle cry. Well, I already said that. Okay, and the 5th angel blew his trumpet, and I saw a star fallen from heaven to earth, and he was given the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit. He opened the shaft of the bottomless pit, and from the shaft rose smoke like the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened with the smoke from the shaft. Then, I've actually got 7 minutes, I think. Then from the smoke came locusts on the earth, and they were given power like the power of scorpions of the earth. Now the fallen star, if you proceed and you read the other verses in other visions in Revelation, this is most likely Satan. Now it's not talking about Satan at the end times, Satan has already fallen, right? He was already defeated. Christ said that he fell like, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Okay? We remember that verse from Jesus. That seems to be what John is referring to. It is the star, it's the fallen star, not the angel that has keys to the abyss. And so the locusts come out, and the locusts are probably one of the harder symbols in Revelation. And I'll tell you what I think they mean, and it's not, I don't think it's a big stretch for us to see the meaning behind them. They were told not to harm the grass of the earth or green plant of any tree. Well, they're not very good locusts, right, if they're not doing that. But only those people who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads, they were allowed to torment them for 5 months, but not to kill them. And their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it stings someone. And in those days, people will seek death and will not find it. They will long to die, but death will flee from them. And so going back to Joel, locusts, I won't read this, but locusts are very important in Old Testament scripture. They are seen as judgment. The invading armies of the north are seen by Joel as locusts. Okay? Now, what are these locusts? Now, I think they're one of the harder symbols to describe. And when people see that, the 5 months, what's that 5 months? And they want to reach out and explain it. I'm gonna. You have your hand out, so you can follow up at home. I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of explain what I think the locusts are. The locusts seem to be the suffering that men bring upon themselves for disobeying God. They don't have the seal of God on their forehead. They do not follow God. They cause pain and suffering by their own sin. Someone gets addicted to drugs or alcohol. Someone is promiscuous and they destroy their families. People cheat, swindle, do all kinds of criminal activity. They bring that sin and suffering on themselves. Okay? And the locusts, in appearance, the locusts were like horses prepared for battle. On their heads were like what looked like crowns of gold. Their faces were like human faces. Their hair like women's hair, and their teeth like lions' teeth. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the noise of their wings was the noise of many chariots with horses rushing into battle. They have tails and sting like scorpions, and their power to hurt people for 5 months is in their tail. Now, again, 5 months. It is a period of very limited period. Now, people trying to get behind the number 5, what is that a symbol of? The locust season, if locust plague existed, they tended to be around for 5 months. That tends to be the life cycle of a locust. 5 months. Okay? They have as king over them the angel of the bottomless pit. His name is, in Hebrew, is Abaddon, and in Greek he is called Apollyon. And John just, that name, that word is just translated right there into the Greek. It means destruction. And both Abaddon and Apollyon mean the same thing. The first woe is past. Below 2 more woes are to come. Going to the Revelation 9, and I'll give you. We'll probably won't wrap this up, and I'll get to it the rest of the next week. So Kaufman says that the locusts, and this is what he thinks, and they're the sins of mankind. They torment those who do the sins, but then when society collapses and society it becomes more and more perverted, if too many people are sinning, if a lot of people are sinning all at the same time, if certain philosophies and certain sinful behavior gets rooted into the culture, then things really become to fall apart. Then society collapses. Now, then the sixth angel blew his trumpet, and I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar before God, saying to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, release the 4 angels who who were bound at the great river Euphrates. So the 4 angels who had been prepared for the hour, the day, the month, and the year were released to kill 1/3 of mankind. The number of mounted troops was twice 10,000 times 10,000. I heard their number, 200 million. Now, so who are these horsemen? Now, it is important to note what the Euphrates is. The Euphrates is the eastern edge of the empire. And I won't develop this now because it's a good place to stop and we're running out of time. But that is the eastern edge of the empire of Israel. It is also the eastern edge of the Western civilized world. It is a boundary. It is also the river. It is the source of humanity itself. Where was the Garden of Eden? But not near the Euphrates. There were 4 rivers actually, but it is associated with the Garden of Eden. By tying it back to the Euphrates, he is tying it back to humanity. Okay? And as a general rule, if you're living at any time in that part of the world, ever, and even now, you're always worried about what's on the other side of the Euphrates, I guarantee it. Okay? It is a bad place to be in the world, and I'll talk about that. But that is something that's kind of a condition. He's not talking about a particular army of horsemen, but that has always been a threat for people living near the Euphrates, horsemen coming across the Euphrates, and the collapse of society. And so, again, you can see why futurists do equate the seals with particular battles or particular groups of people, but again, it's cyclical and it's about the condition of man. Any questions? Yes.
One thing about the eagle is that while it may not be cosmically and perpetually relevant to God, in John's context, the eagle was hard to think about without Rome.
Yeah.
It was a divine messenger, and if the eagle has meaning, it is significant that the only thing it can do is cry out about bad things that are coming. People thought the empire was successful because of the things that it kept out of the bounds, right?
Right.
This distinction between the barbarian world and the Roman world, the prosperity and benevolence of the emperor, and all the wretchedness outside of his control. However, the known messenger of Rome can't do nothing.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's just, all it can do is make the announcement that worse things are coming.
Yeah, that is a very good point. Okay, all right, thank you so much for that. Any other questions or thoughts? Yes.
Like you were saying